Well, good afternoon. My name is Malika Zeghal. I'm a professor in the Near Eastern Languages and Civilizations Department at Harvard. So in my book, The Making of the Modern Muslim State, Islam and Governance in the Middle East and North Africa, published at Princeton University Press in 2024, I provide a new framework to study the role of Islam in governance and debates about it in Muslim-majority countries. And I do so through a geographically and conceptually broad approach and through a longue durée analysis from the 19th to the 21st century in the Middle East and North Africa. The conventional approach to the role of Islam in governance is to focus on organized Islamist movements and their opposition to the authoritarian and supposedly secular states of the region. My approach is broader, not confined to recent history or to Islamist movements. I study debates about the role of Islam in governance among a broad set of protagonists through constitutional history since its beginnings in the 1850s in Tunisia and in the 1920s in Egypt, Syria, and Lebanon. I also quantify state religious expenditures in Tunisia, Egypt, Morocco, and Turkey since the late 19th century or early 20th century. And this allows me to illuminate one of the most important political divides in contemporary Middle Eastern societies, which opposes those whom I call the liberals and the conservatives on the issue of Islam in governance. So let me highlight three main points here. My starting point is the following empirical regularity. In Middle Eastern Muslim-majority countries, except for particularly religiously fractionalized Lebanon, and including Turkey despite its constitutionalization of secularism, there has been a broad agreement across the political spectrum that the state, among other duties, should be the custodian of Islam, the preferred religion. This means that it should protect and support Islam, as well as the Muslim community and Islamic institutions. So this implies that there is no state neutrality toward religion and no separation between Islam and the state, although we sometimes find aspirations to separate religion and politics, which is different. These aspirations have often been misinterpreted to argue that Middle Eastern states are secular in the sense that they are neutral toward religion, or that religion and state are separate, which is not the case at all. What we typically have had, however, is a long-standing differentiation between political and religious authorities working in a partnership. By broad agreement on the issue of the role of Islam in governance, I mean that you rarely find political actors who, in public spaces of deliberation, defend the idea of separation of Islam and the state or the idea of state neutrality. This means that both liberals and conservatives agree that the state should be the custodian of Islam as the preferred religion, but disagree on how this principle should be carried out. In the book, I explain the difference between conservatives and liberals. In a nutshell, conservatives want to expand the role of Islam in governance, and liberals seek to diminish it. Second, in the book, I historicize this political cleavage, and I find that the broad agreement about the necessity of the state custodianship of Islam as a preferred religion and disputes about its implementation are certainly not new. We find them in pre-modern and modern times and in a wide variety of contexts, such as pre-colonial, colonial, authoritarian, and democratic. You will encounter them in the various chapters of the book, from early forms of constitutional governance in the 19th century through post-Arab Spring experiments in democracy. This goes against conventional approaches which blame colonization, nationalism, and the nation state, or socio-economic dysfunctions for what is referred to as the supposedly recent politicization of Islam and for the so-called emergence of Islamism in the 20th century. In fact, in the book, I reassess a well-entrenched received wisdom, the novelty of the Egyptian Muslim Brothers ideology when their society was created in 1928. The gist of the Muslim Brothers political project, the expansion of the role of Islam in governance, in fact, long preceded them and was in continuity with the conservative tradition of political thought, notably expressed by conservative religious scholars. And third, one of the most salient aspects of the state custodianship of Islam is the financial support that the state provides to Islamic worship infrastructure and personnel, Islamic education, and where they remain, Islamic courts and Islamic forms of public assistance. And of course, there are disputes about the extent of this support and tugs of war between liberals and conservatives that lead to short-term fluctuations in the amount of these state-funded public religious provisions. A striking feature is that in relation to GDP, this state financial support is not that large. In the countries I looked at, it has represented and continues to represent less than 1% of GDP, which is significantly smaller than what is spent on religion in the US today, about 2% of GDP. Another significant difference is that in the countries I looked at, public religious provisions have mainly been and remain a state affair, whereas in the US, civil society is the main contributor. Another striking feature is a two-pronged long-term trend. On the one hand, a decrease in state religious expenditures relative to other state expenditures. On the other hand, an increase in per capita exposure to public religious provisions, largely driven by the massive increase in per capita total state expenditures. In the book, I explain this paradoxical long-term trend of relative secularization of the state and absolute expansion of per capita exposure to religion by parsing out mechanistic effects and choices made by policymakers. So let me conclude by insisting on this notion of choice. Having a state-preferred religion is a choice which, in the modern period at least, has been made in full awareness of a wide array of alternative options for state-religion relations. It is therefore not ineluctable. Unlike what we often hear, it is not that the political in Muslim states is inherently or predominantly religious, that Islam is an inherently political religion, or that it is more political than other religions. In fact, some Muslim majority polities do not have a state-preferred religion, and almost half the rest of the world polities do, irrespective of their social, economic, and political rights condition. So thank you for listening, and I hope you will enjoy the book.